Hey guys, welcome to this week's video. We're talking to Darren Vardy about life without government subsidies. Let's get to it and let's go. Darren Vardy, well, welcome to NGR Accounting's video, and thanks for being our guest on today's video, where we're going to be talking about life without government subsidies. And I guess this is really sort of a COVID sort of driven subject about today, but I think it's a really important subject to talk about. Where do business owners go now that, let's face it, I don't think government subsidies are going to come back. I don't think the government can print any more money to make these things happen. So where do we go? But before we do that, that's sort of what we're talking about today. But let's talk about with our audience here a little bit more about who is Darren Vardy.
Who is Darren Vardy? Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for having me. Look, I have been an accountant for the last 30 years, specialising in the insolvency industry, and since been in occupation since 1990. And a lot of things have changed over those years, through the recession that everyone said we had to have in the 90s, right through to the noughties, and now what is the COVID pandemic, which is a life-changing event, and it does have and has had a significant impact upon businesses generally.
Yeah,
for the good and for the bad.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, traditionally, like when we talk about pandemics as well, like they tend to last for on average 3 to 5 years, and we're out in our third year of it. We've only really just completed 2 of it, so we're in our third year, and the reality is probably got another year of it. But and it probably raises that where we are currently, there's probably a few key issues that business owners are really probably facing at the moment. So I think we want to really sort of address what those issues are.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look back to the early 1900s with the Spanish flu, that lasted for 4 years. Not having and not being around back then, we're really in uncharted territory, business-wise. So it's really important now, in my view, is to get on top of business owners, to really get on top of where they're at in business, with it, and try and work out what the future looks like. But obviously need to be flexible enough to move with the times, because things will happen that they will need to adapt to as they go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the key issues that we talked about off camera before we sort of looked at today's video was, businesses are probably really in the last probably year and a half, 2 years, have really only been breaking even. And the reality reason that they've probably been breaking even is they've been getting government grants, which has helped that happening. So, what's going to happen that the government grants are gone? What's it going to look like when those grants aren't around anymore?
Well, automatically that then throws the business back into a loss-making situation. So unless a business throughout COVID has managed to scale back on costs, or they've come out of the restricted trading areas and they're back to trading, their trading is back to where they were before, the majority of businesses out there will be facing themselves with ongoing trading losses. And businesses, they continue to trade as a trading loss. It then exposes directors to things such as personal guarantees for supply, for any suppliers that are owed money, personal guarantees for some tax debt depending on the nature, such as superannuation, but also it can expose directors to insolvent trading, and that's something that needs to be avoided at all costs.
On that note, I think that my time as an accountant, like over the last 20 years, I've probably really experienced it. A lot of businesses, they go, I'm going to set up a company to have that limited liability to protect themselves. But what I think a lot of people forget, and they might have been advised at the time when they set up their company, that if you don't follow the general rules of operating a company, like no insolvent trading, if you do that, all those rights, or that ability to have limited liability and not be sued and have everything kept in the company is voided.
Correct.
And I think a lot of business owners have forgotten that, or just don't even realise that you you don't pay your debts like super and stuff like that, you become personally liable.
And that's the thing, there are some debts, such as super, which is an automatic director liability personally.
Yeah, that's right.
And unfortunately, unlike people who supply stock or product to a business, they're not knocking on the door every month wanting their 30-day account paid. Super is one of those things that is payable genuinely every quarter. So it can add up really quick, and there can be quite a large bill to pay. Yeah. Not dissimilar to tax. On say a quarterly basis, particularly where coming into the December quarter, where a lot of businesses generally have a lot of cash flow, but there's also a lot of expenses that go with it. You've then got a debt due and payable at the end of February, with the next quarter 2 months thereafter at the end of April. So that can also create a lot of tension around cash flow at those times.
That's right. I think one of the other themes as well that we've seen out there that we were discussing off camera as well was that there are some businesses out there where yes, they're operating maybe at a lower capacity, but then there are some that just cannot reopen, and that has meant that until consumer confidence is brought back, and people feel that COVID's gone, it's no longer an issue, the businesses just won't trade because the consumers won't come in for various reasons. Like we were talking off camera, say for example, anyone that helps put together school carnivals, anyone who's involved in that business and trade, schools are just saying, look, we're not going to let out the bulk of our students turn up to these events.
Look, the schools have a duty of care, and they don't want to risk their pupils being involved in such activities. And we were discussing, what happens this time every year is the school swimming carnival. Now, a lot of swimming carnivals, the feedback is that they're being limited to competitors only. There are a lot of businesses out there in various areas that provide different programs to schools for their pupils. Those programs can't be run for fear of COVID and pupils and staff unfortunately becoming affected.
That's right. But yeah, and then the third thing we sort of really talked about was also then businesses, getting access to capital, but then also maybe delaying payments and using that money, like instead of making payments like might be the ATO or super, using that money as capital to keep their business going. But then, what is the true cost of operating like that?
Yeah, and one of the real costs people need to be careful of is that during this period that we've gone through is inadvertently they may have in fact used up all their working capital to keep staff going, to keep supplies going, to keep payments being made. But when it comes to gear up and put new people on and take on new projects and whatnot, they may not necessarily actually have the working capital necessary to get back to business. Traditionally as an insolvency practitioner, we get busy when we come out of a recession, and it's during that climb. Now, those businesses that get left behind are genuinely those who lack working capital to keep up with the economy, to restart out of those recessionary periods.
Yeah, so there's definitely, there's probably more things that we could talk about, but I guess that then, we talked about a few themes today, but what solutions are out there from an insolvency scenario, or I guess space, that could help someone who possibly, maybe things aren't dire straight at the moment, or maybe things are dire straight and things aren't working too well, but when someone comes and sees you, what solutions can you bring to the table to help them, continue their livelihood in their business? Yeah,
sure. Look, with everything, numbers are key. And I understand the way you run your business with your clients. It's all focused around the numbers, being up to date, having timely financials to be able to make some crucial decisions. whenever a business comes and sees me for some assistance, to me it's always, do you know your break even? Do you have any cash flow projections? What is the level of your asset and liabilities? What is the extent of your debt? Once we know the extent of the debt, we can then determine what alternatives are available. The last thing anyone wants is for a company to go into liquidation, right? But ultimately, depending on the extent of the debt and how aggressive the creditors may be at that point in time in the pursuit of monies outstanding, can often be a predeterminer of the ability to trade out of business. If the debt is significant, where a business is unlikely to be able to trade out of it for many, many, many years, the commercial question has to be asked, is A, can you trade out, or B, are you going to be spending the next 5 to 10 years of your working life trying to trade out? And life decisions need to be made around that, in my view.
So I guess what you're saying is sometimes it's like, you have no option but to liquidate the company.
Unfortunately. And that's all because generally those businesses come and seek advice too late. If there are options available there for businesses who, if there's a fundamental core business there and available, depending on the size of the business, we've got your traditional voluntary administration and deed of company arrangement option. And a deed of company arrangement is where an offer is made to creditors over a period of time for the repayment of debts, generally not in full, but certainly provides a greater return to the creditor than they would get through a liquidation process. In January of 2021, the Australian government actually brought in another alternative for small business called a small business restructuring plan. So if you have businesses that have got debts of less than $1 million, they brought in a regime whereby a plan can be put together to pay those creditors, again, over a period of time, not necessarily in full, but for a period of no longer than 3 years for the contributions to be made to repay creditors. That is another option of avoiding liquidation, allowing the business to continue to trade, with creditors getting a return which is far greater than they would ordinarily get in liquidation. By the way, the cost of that process is generally far less than those than the professional costs involved with a voluntary administration and deed of company arrangement. And it's what they term a debtor in possession model. So whilst a plan is being put together by a small business practitioner, the directors are still in control of the business and still operating the business in the ordinary course. Whereas in a deed of company arrangement, as a practitioner, I take control of the business. I operate the business throughout the period of administration, and that in itself, there are inherent costs that are incurred simply by virtue of the nature of my appointment that must be incurred for me to operate the business through that period, which for a small business may or may not be of any utility whatsoever.
And I guess, if we look at that, really what you're bringing to the table when you take over the operation of a business is you're implementing probably all the strategies that they should have implemented before they got themselves into strife or got themselves in the position where they had to come see you. So, really, if we were sort of talking about prevention to, safeguard your business, if you had to, tell the audience 3 tips of what they needed to do, and I think you mentioned them earlier, what would they be?
Look, the key is know what your break even is, have a cash flow forecast, and know the level of your debts. Do you have sufficient assets to cover your liabilities? if you don't have sufficient assets to cover your liabilities, and it's important when we look at that, we look at, you know, your current assets, your stock, your debtors, your cash at bank. Is there sufficient funds there to pay your liabilities, such as your trade creditors, your tax debt, your superannuation liabilities? If there's a shortfall, then we need to look wider at what other asset base is available, what other funds are available for the directors or the shareholders to advance if necessary, because the rule of thumb is, for insolvent trading, if a company can't pay its debts as and when they fall due, then technically it's insolvent.
That's right. So I think really it's like it really comes down to planning, and I guess it's also being vulnerable to say, well, I need some help from other professionals. So whether that's, you know, seeing your accountant, like someone like myself, having a business coach, but really, you know, dealing with the issues that are on the table. You know, sure, and then that consultant, that professional can help you in planning, getting to know your numbers, you know, having a system. And this is I mean, businesses who are successful have all these things in place.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, definitely, we've talked we've known each other for quite some time, and I think that most of the clients that come to see you, unfortunately, haven't had that. I mean, there's probably a small majority where they've just had some really, really bad luck just there and then, and it's led to this position where they've just had to, you know, liquidate the company. But then, you know, the majority of people you're seeing probably just, you know, it's just lack of forecast and planning and having a strategy.
And it's the lack of those with the lack of forecast and planning. Generally, the only option is liquidation. You know, most people that I see that want advice on a solvency or a cash flow issue, what we often find is where they have had a team of advisors around them, they've got good records and financials in place. There is certainly a very good understanding of the business and all the issues. Generally, they will come and see me because there's been an event that has put them in a financial position, but they are of the opinion that with some reorganisation, some restructure, they can trade through, and they are looking for an insolvency process to allow them to facilitate that transition through and out the other side. And it's all about that forethought of knowing, okay, there's an issue here, we need to deal with it, because at the end of the day, if it's not dealt with in a timely manner, it minimises the chance of being able to do a successful or undertake a successful turnaround. And as they say, and it is cliche, you don't, if you fail to plan the fail. Plan the fail.
Yeah, and that's I live by that 100%. Yeah. So, look, that was really good, Darren. So if anyone's out there that is, you know, I guess starting to worry about how they're going to live their business life without government subsidies, because and they're in a position where, you know, they think they need to see someone like yourself.
Yep.
How do they find you?
Well, generally, most people generally come through their referral partners, such as yourself, Nathan. I'm a director of SB Partners New South Wales South and Insolvency Options. The website is iodebt.com.au, where we provide a lot of information generically about the various processes available, so people are able to jump on, get a bit of understanding about what is and what isn't available, and then we just sit down and have a coffee chat about the financial position that's being faced, with a view of then working with their advisors to develop a plan. And
So
a
really,
strategy.
speak to your accountant, maybe your solicitor, whoever, is that consultant in your life that, you share that information with, your business.
Correct.
And the good news is that, when you sit down with someone like Darren, it's non-threatening, everything's confidential, because this can be, like, speaking to someone like you can be quite confronting and quite embarrassing for a lot of people that they're in this position, because there's a lot of pride on the line here, but, there's none of that, is there? Like, there's,
No, and that's the thing. It's unfortunately that is why a lot of people don't take action early enough. But as I say to people facing this situation, they're not the first, they won't be the last. It's a matter of getting in, dealing with the issues, and then moving on. And quite often people are paralysed because they just don't know how to deal with the situation they're faced, and that's where they need to reach out to their professional advisors, who, if they don't have the right skill set, will contact someone like myself to provide the information and advice required to enable a successful turnaround of a business.
And there's no expense, there's no cost to see you, in that first meeting.
Not for any preliminary advice, no. And mostly it's an information gathering exercise to actually work out what is.
Whether you can help them or not.
That's exactly right. So,
well, Darren, I appreciate your time and you coming on here and sharing some information. And we'll share Darren's details. And thanks again, Darren, for your time and the information you shared with us.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
All right, no problems.
Cheers.